Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Terp Family Fundamentals webinar series. My name is Brian Watkins, and I'm the Director of the Office of Parent and Family Affairs. For those that are new, this webinar series is intended to help you become informed consultants on campus resources. If you remember our office's presentation during orientation, we like to say that during the normal course of events, there is no problem that can arise at the University of Maryland that a student can't solve using the many resources available to them here. You've probably registered today because you want your student to be successful in their path to exploring off-campus housing options. We are joined today by Jennifer Lindstrom, Manager for Housing Partnerships and Off-Campus Housing, and Hunter Gibson, Graduate Coordinator in Off-Campus Housing. Please feel free to submit questions throughout the presentation, and we will do our best to respond to those questions before the end of the webinar. With that, I will hand off the presentation. Welcome, Jennifer.
Ryan, thanks for having us. Welcome everybody to Navigating Off-Campus Housing with your Terp. My name is Jennifer Lindstrom. As Brian said, I'm the Manager for Housing Partnerships here at the University of Maryland. Our office falls under the Department of Resident Life. I'm also here with my grad student, Hunter Gibson, who helps me run the office. On this screen, you'll see some of our contact information. We'll also have additional contact information throughout the presentation. So today I'm going to talk to you about housing at Maryland, our off-campus housing, the options, timeline for searching, our public-private partnerships, and what it means to lease off-campus, as well as how to talk to your Terp, some good questions for you to ask so that they are making good decisions. We also have a nice frequently asked questions section that should answer any further questions. But I'm happy to take any question you have along the way and at the end of the presentation. So, as I said, my office falls under the Department of Resident Life. For our on-campus housing, we have 9,500 beds in 37 residence halls. Sometimes people don't quite understand what on-campus and off-campus is. What's considered on-campus is just the residence halls that Resident Life oversees. In between on and off-campus, we have our public-private partnerships in South Campus Commons and the Courtyard. So that makes off-campus everything else. The different apartments and high-rises that you see around town, individual houses, and also we consider, when students are commuting from home, we consider them off-campus students. So this is a great time for you to be here at this webinar because now is about the time when students start thinking about where they want to live for fall. The current public-private partnership residents are in the process of renewing their leases. On-campus students are in the process of deciding if they want to stay on another year, move into a public-private partnership, or move off campus. Most students do live on campus in the residence halls for their first 2 years, and based on the priority for residence halls and public-private partnership, this really maximizes the choices for your junior year, which I'll speak to you a little bit more later. If and when a student does decide to move off campus, they'll have a lot of choices, which we'll go through, and our office is here to provide resources to help students make the best decisions for their needs. Oops. So a public-private partnership is our two properties that are managed by Capstone on-campus management and the Department of Resident Life. The two properties are South Campus Commons on the south side of campus and the Courtyards on the north side of campus. More information can be found at the link in this screen, and we'll be showing that again later. There's 10 or more options of apartments in the College Park area. Just along Route 1, I think we have about 8. We're always finding new housing coming up every year. Additionally, in the residential areas in College Park, there's a lot of houses that can be rented, rooms that can be rented, and apartments and houses. There's also the option to commute from home. So for our public-private partnerships, this is for a lot of students who are currently living on campus, this is often their first thought as far as where they want to go next after living on campus. Both properties have apartment style, or they are apartments. South Campus Commons is directly across from some of our on-campus apartments on South Campus. In South Campus Commons, we have RAs and resident directors that are employed by the Department of Resident Life. Courtyards has similar positions that are just employed by Capstone on-campus management. Just like most off-campus properties, South Campus Commons and the Courtyards offer 11.25-month leases. Usually the range is between 11 and 12, but most properties have at least a couple weeks of time to clean and turn the apartments around. For our public-private partnerships, the priority is given to our on-campus rising juniors, so our on-campus rising third-year students. That's where staying on campus for a second year often benefits students, because then they can be in that first priority group for South Campus Commons in the Courtyards, or if that's not the right fit, they can look off campus as well. We do have some tours coming up for South Campus Commons in the Courtyards if you're interested this weekend and the following weekend. The precise dates and times can be found on our Commons and Courtyards housing page on the Resident Life website. This just shows the location. Courtyards at the top of the screen is just on the other side of 193 near the Xfinity Center, and South Campus Commons at the bottom of the screen is by our South Hill residences. So leasing in South Campus Commons and the Courtyards is a little bit different than leasing off campus, so I just wanted to go over that with you so you have the full information. Right now, students are completing their no obligation leasing applications. Basically, it takes about 5 minutes for students to do, and once they have that, they can kind of set it and forget it, is what I tell them. The deadline is March 8th at 3:59 p.m., and that's a hard deadline. We also have mixed gender housing in Commons and Courtyards, and that's a separate application process. The deadline for that is January 28th, so that's coming up soon. So any applications that are received on time, students would go through the normal open leasing process. If they're received what we consider late at March 8th at 4 p.m. through March 27th, they can still participate in open leasing, but they would lose any priority that they have for being on campus. When we get to March 16th, students will be able to know when their appointment is and what their leasing number, so they can continue to make some of those decisions as to whether or not they want to pursue living in Commons and Courtyards or look off campus. Also, students can be pulled in by current residents if they're a rising third year or fourth year on-campus student, and that kind of helps them get in a little bit before open leasing. To be eligible, there is a priority kind of line where on-campus rising juniors are first in priority, then on-campus rising seniors and sophomores, and so on and so forth. You have to be a full-time undergraduate student in the spring of 2019 to participate in open leasing for the fall. You also have to be in good standing judicially, financially, and academically. Most students are aware of their status. Every once in a while, a student might have a financial block because of an unpaid parking ticket or something like that. So that would be something they want to check into before their leasing appointment. Just like most off-campus housing, the students are responsible for their entire lease, which starts in the middle of August and ends in July. So that's something to be aware of too. If a student is wanting to study abroad, they might want to look at other options, although we can help them work through that process as well. For all off-campus students, they can select meal plans. If you go to dining.umd.edu, they have a nice outline of the different plans that are offered. So if your student isn't quite ready to cook for themselves, they still won't go hungry if they have a dining plan. A lot of students want to know how to get around, especially to Courtyards, since it's a little farther on North Campus. They do have shuttles that run every 8 to 12 minutes. This just shows the priority order for leasing in South Campus Commons and the Courtyards. This is also on that the Resident Life leasing page for South Campus Commons and Courtyards. If your student is interested in this option, but they may be studying abroad in this next spring, they would go through the releasing process. This is just a word for you to kind of understand You don't have to memorize this slide. If that's a choice they're making, we can help navigate them through the process so they can still live in commons or courtyards and have that study abroad experience. So living off campus. So we're looking at staying on campus, moving into public-private partnerships, and leasing off campus. As I said, there's 10 or more apartment options available in the immediate area. In the greater College Park, Hyattsville, Greenbelt area, there's even more than that. So there's a lot of variety depending on what your student is looking for, whether it's lower rents, commute, if they have an internship and they want to be close to a metro. There's a lot of great options available for them. In the large high-rise apartments that you see around College Park, all of the leases, they are assigned through the individual leasing offices. Off-campus housing services does not manage any properties. We just provide you with resources to help you make decisions. So if there's a property that you're interested in, we encourage you to contact the leasing office directly. And we also would encourage you to visit the property if possible. We want students to be as informed as possible, and we really think that visit is an important part of the puzzle. Also, just as something that's important to know, in the off-campus properties, a lot of the leases are signed online, and we've received calls from students who have not realized that they're signing a lease. Sometimes they think they're filling out an application, and then they sign a lease. And once it's signed, it can be very difficult to get out of. So really make sure your student knows what they're signing and knows what they're filling out, especially in online spaces. And we also encourage you to read the lease before signing. We have student legal aid offices, both for undergraduates and graduate students, who are happy to help go through the lease to add some more reassurances. Like I said, most leases are 11 and a half months. And I would say the majority of the properties off campus use a rent installment style of paying the rent. And that's always paid to the individual property. And what the installment means is that they calculate the full 11 and a half months cost of living there. And then they break it up into 12 equal payments. So there's often some confusion as to, why am I paying on August 1st, if I can't move in until the 15th or the 20th? It's because they use the installment style of payment rather than like a traditional rent like I pay. If I move on the 15th, I'm only going to pay about half that month's rent. So this is really important to be aware of because we get a lot of questions about this installment. So installment is the key word when you're talking about rent and living off campus. All right, so we've given you some information about off-campus properties. There's still a lot more out there. Again, we encourage you to visit properties, ask all the questions you have, make sure your students are asking the questions that they have. But we want you to talk to your Terp about what they're looking for, but also balance that with what you can provide them. What are their priorities? Where are their classes located? How is that going to factor into where they want to live? Also thinking about the future is important, whether it's studying abroad or maybe wanting to live in commons and courtyards. So those are the good things to be thinking about now, because it's usually with your housing, it's not just focused on the next year. Wherever you live in the fall can also play out differently going forward depending on your choices. How's your student going to pay rent? That's a really big question. When we look at our off-campus housing database, that's usually the first thing we suggest for students is to put in what their rent range is. Typically, student financial aid will help cover their rent. You do want to check with the financial aid office to make sure there aren't any restrictions on their aid that would preclude them from paying their rent with that award. They also need to know they want to live with roommates. It's cheaper to live with a roommate. Usually the fewer people you live with, the more expensive it's going to be. students typically will, if they're current students, they'll find friends to live with. But if they are moving somewhere where their friends don't want to, they'll need to know how to find other roommates. Our off-campus housing database can help facilitate that. Getting to and from campus, we have wonderful transportation systems, but different students prefer different types, so that'll be important to talk to them about. And then during breaks, what is their plan? Staying on campus, sometimes you will move off during the longer breaks. For apartments, both in public-private partnerships and off campus, you stay there the whole time. You can stay there the whole time and come and go as you please. So that's important to figure out as well. Like I said, expenses is a really important topic to talk about with your Terp. Sharing if you're helping to support them, what you're willing to contribute, and then also what they might have to contribute on their own. Rent obviously is going to be the biggest expense. Utilities can vary depending on the property. At South Campus Commons in the courtyards, everything's included. There's no additional bill. In other properties, electricity might be included, but usually it's water that's included and electricity that isn't, or they might have a stipend minimum that the building will pay, and then students pay anything above and beyond that. Parking too, and transportation on and off campus. If a student lives off campus, they can buy on-campus parking passes, but often they're also paying a fee to park at their property. In courtyards, they actually have free parking for the property, but the student, if they wanted to park on campus, would still have to buy a student parking pass. Most of the off-campus properties come furnished. If your student wants to live in a house, those often are not furnished, so that's another cost to consider. Food is a big topic with students. I know a lot of times, they're just learning to cook for the first time and don't really have an idea of what their expenses might be. So that's a great conversation. Maybe talk to them about what their favorite things to eat at home are and if they would cook it on their own, and talk about how much that might cost. And then just other housing expenses, decorations. Sometimes if you're living in a house and you want to improve the lighting, you might talk to the landlord about doing that. So there's different expenses go along with different types of housing. Like we said before, right now is a great time to start looking. The deadline for public-private partnerships is March 8th. We typically don't see the larger properties filling up until about June or July. So if your student isn't quite sure and wants to see what the options look like in the public-private partnerships, they can go through the open leasing process, and if they decide not to live there, they still have time to look off campus. Also, if your student is a rising sophomore, open leasing for the public-private partnerships happens before the deadline to turn in their returning resident form. So they definitely have a lot of time to think about all their options. Like I had said too, thinking about how long of a lease that they can handle. If they're, graduating in December, they might want to see if they can find a shorter term lease, or if they don't want to be here in the summer as well, or how they would give up that lease if they're not going to stay through the whole time. The best places to find housing is our OCH database. We receive new listings every day for every type of housing you can think of. We also have a bulletin board in the Stamp Student Union for the old school landlords that like to post with paper. And there's also Facebook groups. There's a Maryland Facebook group that your student can sign up for using their @umd.edu email. And there's several subgroups under that. One is housing, and students like to post a lot for subleases and looking for roommates and things there. So that's a helpful resource. So this is our frequently asked questions section. I think this is going to be posted later, so you can refer back to it. Your best resource for information about off-campus housing is our office's website, which actually isn't here. It's just och.umd.edu. And then for Commons and Courtyards, it's the Res Life website on the screen. That has every question I've ever thought of or ever received from students covered on that website. It also has the times for tours and info sessions for your students. I'd mentioned financial aid earlier. The answer of whether or not your financial aid will pay is I always say probably. by and large, I see that students are able to use their financial aid, but there may be some small grants or independent scholarships that don't allow for that. So check with your financial aid. Getting to and from campus, we have a wonderful shuttle system, Shuttle I'm always amazed at how far-reaching it is. So I would have your student check that out. So that would be through dots.umd.edu. If they want to have a car on campus, they would also go to the DOTS website. There's also regional public transportation, the Washington Metro Area Transportation Association, as well as Prince George's County have buses that go around and through campus. And it's also a very walkable and bikeable city. So we would encourage your student to really think about those ways to get to and from campus. I briefly mentioned studying abroad for a semester. It's definitely possible. It's just something you need to plan for. So if that's something your student wants to do, I would encourage them to call the OCH office so we can walk them through their options. As far as reading leases, we have some resources on our website to help students understand leases, but also we really encourage them to use the undergraduate legal aid office because they have lawyers on site that have much deeper legal knowledge than we do. We try not to give any legal advice from our office because we're just not trained for that, but there's a wonderful resource for your student in undergrad legal aid. And once again, we encourage you to start looking now, have these conversations with your student, make sure that they know all their options and have researched all the options so they can make the best decision for them. Again, here's a resource page. Och.umd.edu is the Off-Campus Housing Services website. ochdatabase.umd.edu is our housing search database, and it has a roommate finder. Your student can sign in with their university login and search for housing and roommates that way. We've listed the Commons and Courtyards websites. Facebook is a great resource for housing. Department of Transportation, the Bursar's office. And then again, if you're interested in a particular apartment building, we don't have a lot of information, deep information on each property. So we really encourage you to reach directly out to them, have your student talk to friends who've lived there, and visit the property to learn more. I think that's all I have for today. Again, our office is here to help. We can be reached by phone or email, and we're happy to help whenever you need us. We're also having an off-campus living fair on April 25th from 4 to 6 p.m. So we'd encourage your student to check that out if they haven't made their decision by then. All the local properties will be present so they can talk to representatives directly. And it's also a nice mix of large apartment complexes as well as independent landlords. So it really can cover the gamut of housing types that your student might be interested in. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think we're going to take some questions in a moment.
Yeah, Jenny, so there was one question that came in that we thought we would answer live. Question was about South Campus Commons and Courtyards. How is that billed? Is that billed through UMD or is that separate?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I apologize for not mentioning it. That is actually, so this is where Commons and Courtyards is sort of that pseudo on-off campus. It is billed through Capstone on-campus management. It does not come through the student's university bill. So it's really important, especially at the beginning of terms, when sometimes there's a lag in receiving your student aid, your financial aid funds, to make sure you have at least that first month's payment. What will happen in Commons and Courtyards, as well as any other off-campus property, if you're using your financial aid, after your financial aid hits the university and they've taken out all the tuition and fees, any money left over would be refunded to you and to your student, and then that's what they can use for their on-campus housing or their off-campus housing. But yeah, so for everything except for the residence halls, the rental installment is billed through the individual leasing office.
There was another question about, can my off-campus student buy a food plan? And yes, they can. There are some great meal plans for dining plans for students, and you can go to dining.umd.edu to review those plans. And then, Jenny, one final question. Are there any single spaces for juniors?
I'm going to answer that in a couple ways. So the majority of off-campus properties have individual bedrooms for students. In commons and courtyards, or in commons, there are some one-bedroom and studio apartments, although it's very rare that they come up during open leasing. Usually once a student gets in there, they stay until they're done. And then current residents have first priority to take over any vacancies. Off campus, there's a wide variety. Most of the large managed properties have individual rooms for students, but there are properties that have studios and one bedrooms. Studios and one bedrooms are going to be the highest rental rate option. So depending on how individual your student needs to be, that's something to factor in. Also, kind of on the flip side of the question, a way to make off-campus housing more affordable is to double up in the bedroom, kind of like students do in the residence halls. The courtyards has a 2-bedroom, 2-bath quad. It's basically their 2-bedroom, 2-bath deluxe apartment, and then it has 2 beds in the room. So that's a really affordable option. There's also off-campus properties that have that option to share the bedroom to help keep costs down.
Okay, we'll take one final question. Can a student who's a rising junior for 2019, 2020, who is part of an exempt group like the Honors College, pull in roommates in South Campus Commons if they apply?
So the only group that can pull in is a current resident in South Campus Commons or the courtyards. As far as, so I guess with commons and courtyards, there's kind of 2 phases of leasing. Phase 1 is current residents renewing their lease for their current bedroom, transferring within or across communities, and those students would have that first opportunity to pull in new roommates. So if they have a vacancy in their apartment, they can pull somebody in. The only people they can pull in are on-campus rising juniors and on-campus rising seniors. So current sophomores who live in the residence halls in the spring and current juniors who live in the residence halls in the spring. As far as open leasing goes, that was actually a slide I skipped because it's a lot. So this slide shows the priority order. So in commons and courtyards, if you're an honor student, that there's no priority that comes inherently with that. It's all based on how long whether or not you live in the residence hall and how many semesters you've been in college post high school graduation. So if it's an on-campus rising junior in the honors college, they would randomly go in the mix of all the other on-campus rising juniors for open leasing. And then when a student attends their open leasing, they can choose roommates to live with. So if they have 3 other friends that are on campus rising juniors, they can all go to whoever has the best appointment. If there's a mixed group where, say, it's a junior and a senior on campus, since the senior has the later priority for open leasing, the junior would have to give up their priority and attend, because we can't have later groups cutting in front of the early groups.
Okay, we are out of time. We just want to let everyone know, if you have additional questions, please don't hesitate to email the Parent Family Affairs office directly at terpfamily@umd.edu. And then you are also welcome to email off-campus housing directly at och@umd.edu. We really appreciate the time that you've taken to talk to us this afternoon. Special thanks to Jennifer and Hunter. As we bring this webinar to a close, I want to remind everyone that a recording of this webinar will be available on the Terp Family YouTube page, and we'll also include information on how to access that on the Terp Family website. and our website. As a reminder, our web address is terpfamily.umd.edu. You're welcome to rewatch or share it with another family member. And we appreciate your time again. We welcome any feedback that you have about this webinar, and we hope you have a wonderful day.